member for Calgary Rocky Ridge.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. A couple of weeks ago, I asked the government if they would commit to cancelling their planned payroll tax increases that will shrink paychecks starting on January 1st. In response, the government admitted that some Canadians may be struggling with the high cost of housing, but that they went on to do what they always do, and that is when asked about the affordability crisis in housing, they patted themselves on the back for their half-baked plans for a one-time payment equal to about 1 week's rent in major Canadian cities that they're proposing. We're in the throes of the worst inflation in 40 years, while an entire generation of Canadians give up on the dream of owning their own home. And my specific question rose from a conversation I had with a former business colleague in Calgary who told me about the price jump in a particular condo development. And it occurred to me that when you consider the price increase and also factor in the recent and predictable spike in interest rates resulting from this government's deficits facilitated by printed money, as well as the increase on property taxes, condominium fees, and heating costs, which are also rising, that the income necessary to qualify for this basic, bare, entry-level condominium had nearly doubled in 1 year, according to the formula for mortgage qualification used by lending institutions. So, Madam Speaker, this is heartbreaking for young people. Too many young people think that they will never be able to move out of their parents' homes. Too many people wonder if they will ever afford anything beyond a tiny apartment. Too many young people despair over whether they will be able to start their own families, and this government offers no solutions. They offer only a commitment to shrink Canadian paychecks by increasing payroll taxes, shrink the purchasing power of the money they have left after tax by tripling the carbon tax, and shrink the value of any savings that they might have by continuing to fuel inflation. So, Madam Speaker, the current cost of living crisis was a long time in the making. This government added $100 billion to the national debt before COVID. They squandered the balanced budget that they inherited from the previous government. They broke all of the 2015 election promises that upon which they were elected during a time of a booming world economy. And they allowed structural deficits to creep back into Canadian public finances, undoing 20 years of fiscal prudence instilled by both the previous Conservative government and the Chrétien-Martin government before it. Then COVID hit, Madam Speaker. They added hundreds of billions more in further debt, $200 billion in new non-COVID spending, funded with printed money, triggering a spiral of rising costs, rising interest rates, and rising debt level of service costs. If this government wants to give young Canadians hope for a future with a home that they can afford, they will have to stop making things worse, Madam Speaker. They have to get serious about dealing with the barriers that prevent housing construction from meeting housing demand. They have to get serious about economic growth resulting from real people building real things that supply real services to real consumers, not the crony capitalism that has crept into this government in everything from their infrastructure bank, their super cluster system, and corporate giveaways. They can stop the planned payroll tax increase. They can stop the planned tripling of the carbon tax, which increases the price of food, transportation, and home heating. And, Madam Speaker, Canadians can't afford higher prices and higher taxes with smaller paychecks.
Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources and to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We are seeing higher inflation rates and higher costs of living in Canada and, frankly, right around the world. As a large result of many factors, which include the war in Ukraine, global supply chain bottlenecks, in large part due to the pandemic, and global energy market uncertainty. This is something our government is concerned with, and I can reassure my colleagues that we are working on solutions to support Canadians day in and out. Canadians are facing the pressure when they reach for items at the grocery store and when they pull into a gas station. However, inflation is actually less severe here, 7% in August, than among many of our peers like the United States, 8.3%, the United Kingdom, 9.9%, and Germany, 7.9%. But we recognize the challenges. Now, The opposition would like us to drop the GST on gasoline and get rid of our pollution pricing system. Quite frankly, this would be a terrible idea. It makes much more sense to support Canadians who need it the most with targeted measures like those included in our $12.1 billion affordability plan. Gas taxes represent only a small portion of the total price that Canadians pay at the pump, so cutting them would be ineffective in protecting consumers from powerful global market forces. It's important to understand that these market forces are driving daily changes in gas prices that are often substantially greater than the proposed 5% tax cut. This means that any positive impact on the price of gas would be wiped out in a day. The government would also be in the uneasy, unfortunate position of having spent tens or hundreds of millions of dollars trying unsuccessfully to fight market forces over which it has little control. Putting a price on pollution is the most effective and least costly means of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It's important to note that Canada's approach is flexible. Any province or territory can design its own pricing system that meets its needs as long as it meets the federal benchmark. The federal backstop only applies in jurisdictions that don't have a pricing mechanism that meets the federal benchmark. The federal fuel charge is part of this, and one thing is clear: it does not make life less affordable for the large majority of people. In provinces that do not meet the federal benchmark and where the federal fuel charge has been implemented, approximately 90% of direct proceeds are being directly returned back to households. In 2022-2023, these climate action incentive payments mean a family of 4 will receive $745 in Ontario, $832 in Manitoba, $1,101 in Saskatchewan, and $1,079 in Alberta. In addition, families in rural and small communities are eligible to receive an extra 10%. So the reality is that as part of the climate action incentive payments, most households are getting back more in payments than they pay in increased costs from the federal carbon pollution pricing system. Also, dropping the federal fuel charge in these provinces would mean smaller climate action incentive payments back to the individuals in those backstop provinces. It would mean less money in the pockets of many people, including those living in the member opposite's own riding. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Honourable Member for Calgary Rocky Ridge.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. And I guess tonight we see continued doubling down on the same points we've heard from this government continuously. I didn't hear much about housing in that response, even though that is really what the question that we're debating tonight centered on. But we see the same old, Madam Speaker, splitting hairs over whether or not Canada's inflation crisis is really the worst among peer countries. Yes, other countries that engaged in destructive financial practices, running enormous deficits on printed money, are also suffering the same effects that we have here in Canada. But Madam Speaker, tonight we've had yet again a defense of the carbon tax and the claim debunked by the Parliamentary Budget Officer that the majority of people are somehow better off with this tax.
Terry?
Madam Speaker, our government understands quite well that Canadians are feeling the effects of elevated inflation, particularly at the gas pump and when they reach for items at the grocery store. But dropping taxes on gasoline is simply not the right solution. We have developed an affordability plan that provides more money to Canadians who need it the most when they need it the most. Our plan is a suite of targeted measures in new support in 2022. In fact, some of our measures are already putting money back in the pockets of the middle class and those working hard to join it this year. Canadians can count on us to continue to support them through this inflation crisis while remaining prudent fiscal managers. Thank you, Madam Speaker.